What's up, everybody, and welcome to week 3 of the Illuminerdi's post-credits recap show entitled WandaVision Weekly. My name is Richard Nebens. I'm going to be your host. You can follow me at @rnebens at Twitter, and I am so excited for this week of WandaVision. This is actually the first time that I've watched the episode along with the rest of the world. Stayed up till midnight last night to make sure I got everything, and I am so excited to get to this episode with you guys. So we're going to dive right into it. Now, this episode, unlike the first 3, dives right into the real Marvel world. It's not sitcom. It's not Wanda's alternate reality. This is the real world that this episode dives right into. We start off with somebody being blipped back into existence, and it turns out to be Tiana Paris's Monica Rambeau. It turns out she was snapped along with half the universe in the events of Avengers Endgame, and they are now coming back in the Marvel year 2023, the 5 years later after the time jump, and she is figuring out that everybody is being snapped back, everybody's forming in this hospital that she's in, which we find out that she was in the hospital because her mother, Maria Rambeau, who we saw in 2019's Captain Marvel, was diagnosed with cancer, and they were trying to do some treatment on her. She ended up surviving the treatment, but then the cancer came back, and she passed away 2 years after, which was 3 years before Monica came back in the snap. And Monica is just going nuts because she obviously has no idea what's going on. And that is where we leave for the opening credits, when after that, we see Monica returning to her home of S.W.O.R.D. The MCU is finally bringing in S.W.O.R.D., which, for those non-comic book nerds out there, stands for the Sentient Weapon Observation Response Division, where Monica is apparently a captain because Maria, her mother, ended up founding S.W.O.R.D. in the first place. Obviously, after the events of Captain Marvel, considering that she's, best friends with Carol Danvers herself, who's a Kree-human hybrid. So Monica's working her way back into the fold, along with the new director, Tyler Hayward, and then she ends up having to go on this missing persons case because the protocols inflicted by her mother said that anybody who vanished can't go on extraterrestrial missions. So she's stuck on Earth for now, which apparently means she's been to space, which I can't wait to find out what that means later on. So she ends up getting sent to Westview, New Jersey, which is the same place that all the madness in WandaVision is going on. So that's where we start off. She ends up meeting up with another returning MCU character, which is Randall Park's FBI agent, Jimmy Woo, who is also sent there out of Oakland, and he and Monica team up to try to figure out what's going on. They end up going to Westview and trying to figure out how to actually get into the town because it looks deserted. Monica steps up to it, and it looks like there's some sort of crazy energy field surrounding the city, and she pokes at it, pries at it, ends up getting sucked into Westview, into Wanda's alternate reality Westview, and that is how she ends up in there. Jimmy Woo's freaking out, trying to figure out how to get her back and everything, so he calls in a whole team of experts to try to figure out what's going on. It only takes about a day for everybody to get there. They get a nuclear biologist, a chemical engineer, an expert in artificial intelligence, and the fourth member of that team is our third returning MCU character, Kat Dennings' Darcy Lewis, who is now Dr. Darcy Lewis, after the events of Thor and Thor the Dark World, which were her only 2 MCU appearances. It's been 10 years in the MCU timeline since Thor the Dark World, 8 in the real timeline since it released in 2013, and she has gone on to become an expert in astrophysics, just like her best friend Jane Foster and like her mentor, Dr. Eric Selvig. So they get in there, and Darcy starts going to work, trying to figure out what's going on. She is actually the one who realizes that everything happening in Westview is being broadcast like an old television show, because she's picking up on the cosmic microwave background radiation, the CMDR that's going on. She figures out to get an old TV to try to see everything that's going on in Westview after their drones have come back with nothing. They're using every kind of radar to try to figure out what's going on. And then they end up looking in on episode 1 of WandaVision, the 50s style episode that they filmed and that released 2 weeks ago. And Darcy is the one who figures out that they needed an old TV because the stream is being broadcast like an old TV show. Now, once they figure out that it's being broadcast like an old TV show, Darcy makes the very astute observation that Vision is in there along with Wanda and that he is actually dead. Not blipped, dead. Like Infinity Stone ripped out of forehead. He should not be alive at all. So that's where they figure out that everything's not exactly as it's supposed to be. And it turns from a missing persons case to a missing town case. And then they start identifying everybody that's alongside Wanda and Vision in this crazy sitcom world. They start off with the Hearts from Dinner in episode 1. They figure out that they're real people, along with Norm, Jones, Beverly, Herb. And then they figure out the identity of almost everybody in the town. The one interesting thing about that is that they do not have an identification for Catherine Hahn's Agnes. So she is going to be really, really interesting to pay attention to as this show goes forward, because there's rumors that she's going to end up being the villain of the show. There is no clue as to who her character is yet. Some have mentioned Agatha Harkness, but we will have to see where that goes. Then Darcy ends up figuring out again, she turns out to be super smart in this episode. She has done her research and her studies, and she turns out to be awesome in this episode. She figures out a way to get to Wanda is by trying to use the radio that's in her kitchen. Now, the radio ends up moving from the 50s to the 60s to that poolside chat with Dottie, and then they figure out how to work the frequency into there, which we find out that the message coming from the radio in episode 2 was actually Jimmy Woo trying to get in touch with her. So she ends up, hearing it, but it seems like she's washing it away, trying to ignore it and basically changing the whole reality around her so that she didn't hear it. So they think the mission's a total failure, and then it goes from there. What ends up actually happening, we find out more about the beekeeper from episode 2. Also, they send in this guy named Agent Franklin, which, awesome reference. My middle name is actually Franklin, so kudos for me there. But regardless, they send Agent Franklin in through the pipes below Westview. He ends up getting past the barrier, and you can physically see him changing into the beekeeper when he comes out of the other side of the sewer, which is where Wanda and Vision find him, where she says, nope, and changes everything again. We don't hear anything from Agent Franklin again for the rest of the episode, so he's going to be another thing to pay attention to as these things go on. So Wanda and Jimmy are watching the show. They're trying to figure out what's going on, looking at everything, eating some chips and everything. And then they hear when Monica mentions Ultron, because they've been paying attention to Monica throughout the whole show, because she's in there. It looks like she's blending into everything, and you can't tell if she's faking it or if this is actually really happening. But they get to the Ultron mention, and then that's when everything starts going crazy. They hear something outside, and then we go fill in some spots from the end of episode 3 into episode 4, because Wanda apparently used her real powers to just hurl Monica Rambeau out of this reality, because she is super angry at what's happening. And then Monica's hurled out. They find out that Wanda is controlling this thing completely by herself, which is just absolutely nuts. Monica makes the realization it's all Wanda. So then they go back. They replay the end of episode 3 again when Vision comes in, and Wanda says that Monica had to rush home, or Geraldine had to rush home, because she hasn't been called Geraldine in a while. And then Monica turns around, and we see Vision looking absolutely nuts, because he looks the way he looked when he died in Avengers Infinity War after Thanos ripped the Mind Stone out of his head. There's a huge gaping hole in his head. His eyes are completely glazed over. You can't see his pupils, before Wanda changes it again, tends to the babies, the newborns, and then she and Vision sit on the couch. But Monica and Jimmy and Darcy don't see all that, because it just completely cuts in the video feed. So they are led to believe that Wanda is controlling every aspect of what's going on in Westview. And she even says, I have everything under control. So this series is really starting to get nuts as we see mostly real world stuff. I mean, this episode was about 90% real world action, maybe about 10% sitcom, and all of it was from the first 3 episodes, the 50s, 60s, and the 70s episode. So this series is really starting to turn on its head. It's starting to get absolutely bonkers, just as everybody said it would. And I cannot wait to see where this goes. But starting off with its connections to the larger MCU, obviously the Monica Rambeau story is a direct continuation from everything that happened in Captain Marvel. We only saw her at about 10 or 11 years old in Captain Marvel, along with her mom Maria, when they were chatting it up with Carol Danvers, trying to figure out everything that was going on there. So Monica has grown up. Unfortunately, Maria has passed away now, which is obviously going to be a huge impact on Monica's life. Monica was also part of the snap from Avengers Infinity War, as we mentioned earlier, when Thanos snapped away half of all existence with the Infinity Gauntlet. And so that will be another thing to really pay attention to with her, how she's affected by that. We still don't know how we're going to use her powers, how we're going to see her powers, rather, in the show. I actually, funny enough, thought when the episode first started that we were seeing her powers in action, when in reality she was snapped back. That was me. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. Let me know in the comment section if you do. But anyways, moving on from Monica, when we see Agent Woo return, the first thing we actually see from Agent Woo is a reference to Ant-Man and the Wasp, because when he was interviewing Scott Lang during his house arrest with 3 days left, Scott had learned a bunch of magic tricks. And it turns out that Agent Jimmy Woo has caught on to some of those magic tricks himself. He was trying to do it the entire way through Ant-Man and the Wasp, and he finally learned the damn card trick as he showed Monica his ID, his FBI ID. So way to go, Jimmy Woo, for figuring out that card trick finally. Getting on to some Easter eggs for the episode, there's 3 in particular that I noticed. One of the names of one of the real-life people from Westview was Sharon Davis, who was playing Mrs. Hart, the wife of Vision's boss, Mr. Hart. Now, Sharon Davis isn't actually anybody from the comics, but it is an interesting nod to some of the production team on WandaVision, because Sharon Davis is the name of the real-life supervising art director for the show. So way to go for her for getting her name into WandaVision. Another interesting reference was going back to Agent Woo's meeting with Monica Rambeau. He was talking about his life. You know, he dove into how he had an Eliot Ness poster on his wall instead of Michael Jordan, like all the other kids had, which, you know, hilarious moment. I love the way Randall Park is coming back into the series. But Eliot Ness is an interesting reference because he is actually one of the guys who in the early 1900s, in the early 20th century, ended up taking down Al Capone. So we very much see where Jimmy Woo gets his inspiration from to be such a good FBI agent. And then the last thing that I noticed was actually came from a colleague of mine at the Illuminerdi, CJ. So great job picking out this one. The CMBR that Darcy was referencing when she was trying to figure out the whole TV thing. It was referred to as relic background radiation coming from the Big Bang, which, you know, when everything came into existence in the first place in real life, that could end up meaning, you know, some kind of Infinity Stone connection there, with Wanda radiating some energy or radiation from the Infinity Stones, with the Mind Stone specifically, and that could be what's happening in Westview with everything, which is also going to be really interesting to pay attention to with Monica Rambeau's powers whenever they come in, because we know she's going to turn out to be a superhero for Captain Marvel too, but we don't know if she has her powers yet. We assume not, but it'll be interesting to see if maybe WandaVision kind of serves as a side origin story for Tiana Paris's Monica Rambeau. So she'll be something to really look out for as the series goes on. In terms of acting performances, I thought everybody did a fantastic job in this episode, especially as Monica, Darcy, and Jimmy Woo all got either more screen time or their first screen time. Jimmy Woo in particular was just absolutely hilarious. I love the way they expanded on him from Ant-Man and the Wasp. He had some of the funniest lines in the whole series, which I'll also get into since I have a funniest lines moment in this segment. I think my favorite part of the whole episode was when they're first watching episode 1, the recap from episode 1, where Wanda and Vision are in the kitchen before the dinners with the hearts. And Jimmy Woo just goes, "So you're saying the universe created a sitcom starring 2 Avengers?" Which is more or less what happened. And it's kind of what we were all thinking during the first 3 weeks of this show. So way to go, Jimmy Woo, for giving an audience a little insight on this show. And then, of course, I love Darcy's response. It's a working theory. And then her whole thing with the coffee, trying to get a cup of coffee for the whole first half of the episode. Her and Jimmy's interactions during the whole thing were just great, especially when they were watching everything before everything went crazy. And Jimmy Woo just goes, he's thinking about having kids and everything after Darcy seems to ask him if he wants kids. And he's thinking, a little Jimmy Woo, get him a tiny FBI badge. And she just gives him the chips instead. And then, obviously, Darcy's reaction to Wanda having twins. And she just goes, "What? I'm invested." So this series brought some great comedy from those two and Monica, especially as she came back to S.W.O.R.D. And this episode really, really just set home that this series is in the MCU. This is how things are going to be on Disney+. And I am just so pumped that this is how things are going to be. When I first started watching this episode, this literally felt like an MCU movie transplanted from the theaters to Disney+. And I think Marvel and Disney have done a fantastic job already, even just one episode in, besides all the sitcom stuff. And I cannot wait to see where they go with episodes 5 through 9. So that is all the time we have this week. I have loved bringing this next episode of WandaVision to you guys. I cannot wait for the next few weeks. And I wanted to do something new, guys. I want you guys to get involved on social media. You can follow me at @RNebens, RNEBENS. And you can also follow the Illuminerdi on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I want to do a little poll this week. I want to see what your guys' favorite MCU reference in this show was. Since this show, as I've mentioned, is set directly within the MCU. I want to know if you like Monica being involved in the snap, Jimmy Woo learning the card trick after Ant-Man and the Wasp, or Vision's Avengers Infinity War look. So let me know on Twitter what you guys think. You can comment on this video also, and I cannot wait to get involved with you guys and hear your responses. Thank you so much for joining me for another round of the Illuminerdi's post-credits show, WandaVision Weekly, and I cannot wait to come back with you guys for episode 5. I'll see you guys soon.